Hello and welcome to this week's Used Car Heaven. Coming up in this programme, now that it's autumn, we've decided to test out 2 cabriolets, and in part 2 there'll be more from our car doctor and a Honda and a Toyota to test out. But first, a Saab and an Audi go head to head. Audi's cabriolet has been around for a long time now, and its technology dates all the way back to the early Audi 80. But what's important with cabriolets and convertibles is how quickly the roof goes down, isn't it, Ian? Well, Ian, I really like the look of the Audi cabriolet. I think it's very, very stylish. And as for the roof, well, it's not as comprehensive as some of the latest cars have got because it's not fully automatic. Well, that roof is taking an age to go down. Some cars like the Porsche Boxster take as little as 12 seconds, but the Audi seems to take an eternity. Well, there we are, but inside the Audi it's absolutely gorgeous. We've got a fantastically built cabin, we've got wood, we've got leather. This is an SE spec car as well, so it gets climate control, it gets a great stereo system, it gets electric mirrors and windows too. It's a very nice place to be, and it's a full 4-seater. So it may be a bit cold outside, but in here it's very nice. The sun is shining, it's a glorious day, and we thought it would be time to test out some cabriolets. And this Audi cabriolet has been around for quite some time now. This was introduced in 1992 and it's based on the original Audi 80, so technology is not fantastic. It suffers from scuttle shake, but there will be an all-new Audi cabriolet out soon based on the latest A4. In the meantime, these cars are achieving somewhat classic status, and they're holding their value well too. I think that the Audi Cabriolet is one of those cars that looks good with the roof up or down. Bad points about it, well, the ride is pretty poor, but the steering and the handling are very sharp, surprisingly enough. The nicest cars that you'll find of these would be at main dealers. There are a few about, but they are the most expensive. This is a 2.8 V6 producing 174 brake horsepower. This is an automatic as well, so it's very smooth and very slick and pretty quick too. So if £20,000 is out of your price range for a car like this, what's the cheapest Audi Cabriolet? Well, we looked around and we saw a 94L 2-litre E, 60,000 miles on the clock, yours for £7,500. Pretty cheap for a stylish car like this.
These cars really are desirable, rare and holding up well in the market. Any car under 4 years old should have a full main dealer service history. Older cabriolets might have seen a bit more life, but can be substantially cheaper. Great choice of engines and a clever electric hood add to the value.
These Audi Cabriolets are fast achieving cult status, so if you want one and you see one, snap it up quick, although you're unlikely to find a real bargain. Coming next, we'll be driving the Saab convertible, but first, here's Richard Hammond.
Welcome back to week 2 of our course. I'm glad to see so many of you have made it. Now, last week we learned how to look at the outside of a car. This week, the interior. You know, when you think about it, the interior of the car takes almost as much, if not more stick than the exterior, because that, after all, is where we spend most of our time. So you can learn an awful lot about a car's history from looking at the interior, if you know the signs. Right, I'm going in. Now, we human beings do tend to have a bit of an impact on our environment. So if some punter has been perched in here for the last 250,000 miles smoking fags and eating crisps, there will be signs. Signs that we can sniff out no matter how carefully it's been valeted in here. And sometimes it literally is a case of sniff it out. Climb in and breathe in. If it reeks like the bottom of an old canal, maybe the car has been at the bottom of an old canal, or at least suffered badly with damp ingress. Walk away. but there are other signs. Check out what it says on the odometer. Okay, once you've got an idea of that, does it match? If the seat looks a bit threadbare, a bit tired and tatty, and it says 70,000 on there, odds are it's true. If it says 25,000, somebody's telling porkies. And there are more signs. The seat belts. Pull them out to their full extent, and they should spring back like a puppy to its mother. Or maybe not. That's been used a few times. Again, if there's a few miles on the clock, it's probably right. If somebody says it's a fresh one, they're telling porkies again. Now, where else in the car, apart from our backside on the seat, does one particular part of the body spend a lot of time? Well, it's obvious, isn't it, really? Hands on the steering wheel. They're there most of the time we're driving, hopefully. If the thing is worn, more highly polished than a politician's palm, and somebody's selling you a low mileage car, they're telling porkies. Make sure it corresponds with what's showing on the odometer. Also, the gear lever, same rules apply. A bit polished, fine. Worn down to the stump, not. One thing to make absolutely sure of is that the chassis number matches the engine number. You'll find the engine number written on, well, the engine. You'll find the chassis number all sorts of places, depends on the car. It might be under the carpet somewhere at the front of the driver's seat, might be in the corner of the windscreen. Get the owner to point it out for you, or look it up in the manual, it will feature. Right, now I'm climbing across, so coming through, because there's one last thing you can learn an awful lot from. This little fella. If the ignition key isn't the same as the key that opens the doors, why do we think that is then, Captain? That's because somebody has changed the locks. It's probably been broken into. Goodness knows what's gone on. I'd walk away. Put it in, don't start it, just turn it till we get to one click before starting, and look. If none of the lights light up, that could well mean that the rapscallion selling you the thing has disconnected the fuse, which means disaster. Don't just walk away, run.
Saab's trusty and reliable 9.3 range has been around for just over 3 years now, a replacement for the earlier 900 models. And the 9.3 I think is a stylish car. It has the typical sort of boxy Saab looks to it, but these cabriolets and convertibles are very, very desirable. Well, as you can see, it's possibly a little bit quicker than the Audi. I timed that at about 25 seconds, but it's a complex roof mechanism to take down. But once it's down, you get the benefits of open-top motoring. Inside here, it's a wonderful cabin to sit in. This is an SE spec car, so it's got leather, it's got climate control and all the goodies that you would expect. And the cabin is wonderfully designed. Everything is neat and close at hand, and the seats are ultra comfortable. Saab's 9.3 saloons, coupes and cabriolets are a very important car for Saab because they sell extremely well. And these 9.3 cabriolets are just lovely, lovely cars. They look so good going down the road. Now the 9.3 is a big improvement over the old 900. Gone are some of the rough edges to the car, whereas this is just quality through and through. These cars do sell very well, and there are lots about on the marketplace. What you need to make sure is that they've got a good service history and they've been well looked after. This is an S-Reg car. It's a 2-litre turbo SE. It's done slightly higher mileage of nearly 40,000, but you could pick this car up for around £16,000. There's a great choice of engines and models in the 9.3 Cabriolet range, starting off with the base 2-litre model, which gets an engine producing 130 brake horsepower. This car produces 185 brake horsepower, so it's very quick with very little turbo lag now. There's also a Turbo Sport 200 brake horsepower and the very quick Vigans with 225 brake horsepower. But having driven the Vigans, I would advise against buying that car because there's just too much power going through the front wheels. And the Saab and the Audi are both front-wheel drive cars, whereas the main competitor, the BMW 3 Series, is rear-wheel drive. The Saab 9.3 does drive very well. The power is smooth, especially from this very slick 4-speed automatic gearbox. And I think that the Saab is a very sensible alternative to a Mercedes CLK or a BMW 3 Series, and a lot less money.
Buy any Saab and you're being that bit different. Sure, you could afford a 3 Series, but everyone else has got one. And the 9.3 convertible is comparatively rare. Not as rigid as the coupe, it does suffer from scuttle shake. But as a car to look cool in, roof down, it's great.
So, which of these two cabriolets or convertibles would I choose? Well, the Audi is very stylish but suffers from too much scuttle shake, whereas the 9.3 feels solid and rigid. And the fact that you could pick this car up for about £4,000 less than the Audi makes this the car for me. That's it for part 1 of Used Car Heaven. In part 2, we're pitting a Honda against a Toyota. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Used Car Heaven. Coming up soon, our car doctor Simon Hughes is back in the surgery, but in this part of the programme we're driving 2 Japanese cars, both built in Britain, and both could be described as being rather, well, dull to be honest. The Toyota Avensis and the Honda Civic. Now, if you're thinking that you've seen the Honda Civic somewhere before but with a different badge on it, well, you're absolutely correct, because the Civic is also a Rover 400. This car was the last of the collaborations between Rover and Honda before they went their separate ways. But this car is built in Britain, in Swindon, but inside leaves a lot to be desired. And what I mean by that is, well, just look at the dashboard. It's rather dull and plain, but it's functional. There's an attempt at some fake wood trim there to liven up the cabin a bit. Things like the electric window switches are thrown haphazardly into the car. For instance, search for the passenger side electric window switch and you'll search in vain for a while until you find it hidden down here by the handbrake. But this is a 1.4S and it has got air conditioning on it. Build quality on these British-built Civics is right up there with the very best, as you would expect from Honda. It's very, very good and somewhat better probably than you'd find on a comparable Rover 400 model. Inside the cabin, well, as we mentioned before, it's somewhat dull and plain. I think that Honda are a bit of a sort of Jekyll and Hyde company. They produce stunning supercars like the NSX, and then they build the Honda Civic, driven by little old ladies to the shop and back. You'll find that many of the Honda Civics have done very little mileage because they just don't get used that often. They really are used to go back and forth to the shops and rarely get a good blast on the motorway or a long journey. So you can pick up some really low mileage cars at reasonable money. Now, the Civic was first launched back in 1995 and production of this car has now finished because there's an all-new Civic out. This car has done 16,000 miles and you could buy this for £6,500. The Honda Civic range is comprehensive. You've got a good choice of body styles to choose from. A 2-door coupe, a 3- or 5-door car like this, a 4-door saloon, and a 5-door estate, which they call the Aero Deck. And lots of engines, starting off with this 1.4, there's a 1.5, 1.6, 1.8 petrol engines, and a 2-litre turbo diesel. The pick of the engines to choose would probably be the 1.8, producing 167 brake horsepower. One good thing about buying a Honda Civic is that these cars do hold their value particularly well. When this car was new, it only cost about £12,000. This is a 1.4S. It's got an 89 brake horsepower engine. Doesn't sound a lot, but it's nippy in such a small car, and it drives very well.
If you like the look of the Civic and wanted to feel patriotic, you might choose the identical Rover 400 instead. But don't forget, these are built in Britain too. The all-new and vastly different Civic seems to have gone down well with Honda's loyal owners, making the old Civic see a slump in values.
Reliable and well screwed together are words that sum up the Honda Civic, and pretty cheap too, with this sort of car for £6,500. We'll be driving the Toyota Avensis soon, but first here's our car doctor, Simon Hughes.
Right, a very common fault on cars is a knocking noise when you're going around corners, and you'll hear it quite often when you pull away from a junction and accelerate on full lock. Now that's usually a knocking drive shaft, and just to show you what a drive shaft is, we've got one here. Because all cars have drive shafts fitted, you can see that it goes from the wheel through to the gearbox and obviously drives the car along down the road. But more precisely, the noise will be the joint on the end of the shaft, which will be knocking. Now then, each shaft on a car has got sort of a wobbly bit at each end called a CV joint, and you can see that that allows the wheel to go up and down and also move around corners. Now we've got 3 stages to this knocking fault. The first stage is before it's even started knocking, in that what we need to do is check the drive shaft boot to see if there's any damage, and on this one there's a hole there, and you can see grease has started to come out of there, and water will also get in there, causing it to wear and causing it to knock. So the very first phase of the problem is to check the joints, and if it is damaged, then you'd fit a new boot, such as one in a kit here, and hopefully the problem will never occur. The second phase is once the joint has started to knock, hopefully we can cure it by, again, fitting one of these kits, but this time replacing the boot, but also packing it with grease again. So by squirting some grease into the knocking joint, very often if we pop that in there and we work it in and we rebuild it, quite often on a road test it'll stop knocking and we can get quite a lot more life out of the joint. Now the third stage of the problem is a worst case scenario, in that it might need a new drive shaft, or if you're lucky it might be one that splits like this one does. Let's have a look here. There, where the joint will come off and you can just fit a new joint onto the shaft, which will keep costs down, because one of them can cost hundreds of pounds, whereas you can get a joint from about £50, so that's good. Now then, it's important to obviously listen to your car when it's making these noises, because a worst case scenario could be that if the knocking was left, the joint could come apart and it could damage your steering and your brakes and cause you to crash. So moving on from here, the very first thing you need to do on your car is to check to see if there's any damage before it gets to the knocking stage, and hopefully you can save yourself a few quid.
So the second of our Japanese cars built in Britain is the Toyota Avensis. This car is built in Derbyshire, and since it was launched it's been very popular and sold well. Now for some people, having a car is merely a means of getting from A to B, doing it in comfort, making sure that the car is reliable. But that's not for everyone. Me, I prefer something with a bit more zip. When Toyota launched the Avensis back in 1998, they produced a very glitzy TV commercial, quite famous and quite unique. It showed the Avensis being driven around a large American city, with the driver sat back here in the passenger seat as I am, and the car was driving itself. It was the Toyota Avensis, the car that drives itself. And it's actually quite roomy back here. It's a good size. You can have the Avensis in 4-door saloon like this, 5-door hatchback, or in estate form. Now obviously the Avensis doesn't drive itself, but the driving position is actually a very pleasant place to be. Inside you get, well, the usual Japanese foibles of masses and masses of grey plastic. There's an attempt at some luxury with some wood trim, but they're quite well spec'd, these cars. This is a 1.8 GLS, 4-door saloon. When this car was new, it would have cost around £16,500, but now with almost 40,000 miles on the clock, this would sell for about £6,500, which is cheap for an Avensis. The predecessor to the Toyota Avensis, the Carina, was one of those cars that sold in quite large numbers, particularly here in the UK, but was so bland and dull in its styling that you never really noticed the cars on the road. The Carina was pretty awful to drive, to be honest, whereas the Avensis, thankfully, is a lot better. I can remember driving this car 3 or 4 years ago when it first came out and being very uninspired by the way that it drove, but having spent some time with it today, I think I've revised my opinion slightly of it. It's not that bad. It's got a slick 5-speed gearbox, and the steering actually feels quite good and is sharp on the road. The Avensis has become very, very popular with people who are retired and perhaps getting a little older in life, because they want something that goes well, that's comfortable and that won't let them down, and that's inexpensive to run. These 1.8 petrol engines will astonishingly do around about 40 miles to the gallon. There is a diesel version of this car, but you don't get much better fuel economy, so you might as well go for the petrol option. One thing to watch with the Avensis is that you don't pay over the odds for a used car. Toyota were one of the few manufacturers who didn't cut list prices about a year ago when the other manufacturers were doing it. However, dealers are knocking chunks off the prices of new cars now, and that's had a knock-on effect into the used market. The earliest car we saw was an R-Edge with 60,000 miles on the clock, and you could pick that sort of car up for around £4,500.
The Avensis might well be a slightly boring and uneventful car, but great reliability and build quality attract buyers to it. Good range of engines, including the 1.8 petrol we drove, which offers fantastic fuel economy. Plenty of space and a large boot add to the package.
So, if I was buying either of these two cars, where would my money go? Well, it would go on this car, the Toyota Avensis. I think it's a better all-round package, despite the fact that this car has done a higher mileage. That's it for this week's Used Car Heaven. We'll be back at the same time next week.